Hi, everyone. My name is Jan Mercer-Doms. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Meshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you're watching our Women in Money show, brought to you each and every week. Please make sure to join our YouTube channel and become a subscriber to stay up to date on all of our incredibly relevant and timely content. And join us at joinmeshad.com to learn more about how you too can become a member of how we revolutionize the way in which professional women connect, engage, and do business together. We have a special treat for you today on this episode. I would like to welcome Lynn Greenberg to the conversation. Hi, Lynn. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, you're welcome. Lynn is the founder and CEO of Pivt Enterprise, which I cannot wait for her to tell us all about, which is so incredibly relevant right now as we're moving through 2020 at lightning speed. And Lynn is also a tech entrepreneur, advisor, and venture capitalist. Lynn, to start off the conversation, I would love for you to tell us the story of the passion behind Pivt and what inspired you to launch the company.
Absolutely. Well, Pivt was started actually out of my own experience. So actually 3 weeks after graduating from college, I moved to London to work for Bloomberg. And I landed there without knowing anyone and faced the issue that all people do moving to a new and unfamiliar place, which is how do you go about making your new city feel like home? And there were two things that I really needed. The first was information on my city from people I trusted. I didn't know where to live. I didn't know which bank to join, where to take my mom for dinner when she came to visit. And these weren't things I wanted to rely on a Google or a TripAdvisor for. The second piece was how do you go about recreating your network from scratch? Because it's friends you need the most when you're adjusting to a new and unfamiliar place. So I became really curious about the problem, started going to meetups, tried Facebook groups, dating apps. None really seemed to fit the bill. And I spoke to other colleagues of mine at Bloomberg London with, that office being the international hub. And it seemed to be a much bigger problem than just myself. So I didn't have, a business background, and the only tech background I had was what I was doing at Bloomberg. So started taking classes, everything from marketing 101 to how to build a startup. And, the one thing I wasn't able to grasp was the venture side of things. And I was really interested in, okay, if I were to build, a company, how would I create something that's investable and valuable? So Roy Bahat at Bloomberg Beta let me kind of, go under his wing and help them source deals while also doing my role at Bloomberg, and learned a lot. And happy to tell you more about kind of what that turned into, but that's really, the origin behind Pivt.
Lynn, this is really fascinating because, you had such a holistic approach to ensuring that when you launched a business, right? And understanding that there are multiple components that go into that. I think that for many of us, when we think about launching a business, we do so because like you identify a problem in the market or a white space in the market, and you want to fill it because you know that there's a need for it. But the business background is so incredibly important to understand. So once you bring a product to market, what does that even mean if the market doesn't exist, right? Or if you don't have the pricing strategy figured out. Talk to us a bit about why right now that's even more incredibly important in the sense of some of the changes that you've seen in the VC and angel space since COVID happened at the earlier part of this year.
You mean why kind of having that background is? Yeah. So, I learned a ton. So after I was did a little bit of kind of helping with Bloomberg Beta, I moved back to New York to launch our consumer app and wasn't at the point where we could take Pivt off the ground. So actually joined another venture firm called Autonomy Ventures, which invests in AI, robotics, and autonomous mobility. And again, another space that I had no idea about. But what it really taught me to be was learn from other people, ask for help, really, be comfortable with a steep learning curve, all of which were really important skills to acquire as an entrepreneur. And what's really helped through COVID is being just that. We're going into the unknown. No one really knows what tomorrow is bringing. and being able to ask for help, being able to do research and being able to, speak to lots of people and get their takes on things has never been more important. And then, likewise, Pivot is currently raising around, and that's been really interesting as well. Kind of having that background of because when you're looking for investors, as I understand now after going through it, it's a partnership, and most say actually it's a marriage. And so you have to be sure that these are the right partners to take you from A to Z. And so, during COVID, where the funnel is even smaller with people investing, finding those right partners are even, more challenging, but equally important.
We were talking before the show around funders, some of the challenges that they're facing because we're not doing as much business face to face right now. And from a funder perspective, like the importance on finding and investing in the right team and the challenges associated with that now that you're not necessarily having in-person meetings right now. Do you find that as an investor, it's even more so critically important now that to think about holistically the team you're investing in addition to the viability of the product or service that you're launched?
Absolutely. As you said, when you're investing in a company at such an early stage, you're expecting that the team's going to pivot, for lack of a better word, one way or another. And it's really the team that you're investing in. And so, as you brought up, doing everything over Zoom is really, really challenging. And so I think, everyone is kind of improvising and finding new ways to really validate the team. So one is, via Zoom, but B is doing, extra background checks and, getting more sources to validate the character, in the background of the founders. So it's been really interesting, and it'll be, really fascinating to see what comes out of this, in the new normal.
Talk to us a bit about your platform, about Pivot.
Yeah, so Pivot is a social app designed specifically to reduce churn and improve the well-being of relocated and mobile employees. So what I didn't mention was we initially launched Pivot as a consumer app for people moving and traveling to help acclimate in their new city. And we were on the App Store and Google Play for about 6 months. In New York and London, when we got approached by corporations, and they said, we came across your platform. It's actually something we're struggling with internally with our relocated employees and business travelers. Is this something you'd be interested in building for businesses? And what we found was pretty staggering, that corporations on average spend about $90,000 relocating a single employee. And because there's no social component helping these people acclimate, about a third of those people quit their job within a year or move back home because of social reasons. So, this is really going back to the fact that I had a life-changing experience abroad, and I want, everyone to have that experience and more. And, it pains me that something as simple as, not having the network to source trusted advice and make quality friends is what's really holding people back. So that's really what we're trying to solve.
I think it's fascinating that right now, given the fact that we're all living during COVID, and as companies and leaders trying to figure out, like, what does corporate culture mean now, and how do I ensure that I have, teams of people that feel safe and healthy and protected and well taken care of. Mental health is going to become such a huge component of how people think about their relationship to everything in the world, right?
Absolutely.
And even more so now than ever. And we see such heightened levels of stress and anxiety related to the uncertainty as to what the future brings, socially, economically, politically, culturally. So how would you envision, or how do you envision Pivot meeting this demand for employers that, even want to go above and beyond to ensure that they're also taking into consideration the mental health component for people that may or may not even be traveling? Because I would assume that that's kind of the belongingness and the sense of community and the purpose that comes from all of that is also a big part of just how every employee lives out their relationship to their employer now.
Absolutely. So, one of the silver linings of all of this has really been that I think employers now more so than ever are really emphasizing employee well-being. And they're seeing that it's not just, the right thing to do by way of your employee, but it's also attached to a high ROI. And I think that's going to be one of the, lasting components of this, pandemic is I think there's going to be much more attention around employee well-being and retention. And so, we're certainly seeing that. We've seen a rush of, companies reach out to us about, solving for social isolation and providing, support beyond the office or giving them a pat on the back in the office, which is no longer, viable. And so, that I think is going to be one of the lasting things that comes out of the pandemic for sure.
We also see during this moment in time so much disparity in the sense of all of the things that have come out because of COVID, in the sense of healthcare disparity, racial disparities. Hey, David, should we stop? Yeah, we lost. Hey, Lynn, we don't see you anymore.
Can you see me now?
David, do you see her?
Hang on.
Oh, you're back.
Perfect.
Okay. Lynn, we see a lot of disparities coming out in the workplaces now as it pertains to everything from access to healthcare to the needs of essential workers, to even women that are overrepresented in every unemployment vertical right now. How do you envision Pivt being a part of that solution to ensure that employees' mental and emotional needs are being taken into consideration, but also to be a solution to ensure that there is stronger efforts in the diversity, equity, inclusion space within a company setting?
Absolutely. So I think, one of the things I'm most excited about is we're really trying to create the human side of relocation and travel. So as of right now, there's an A/B punch list for moving people from A to B and moving people's things. But what's really not accounted for is the social well-being, the mental health of not just the employee moving, but also the spouse. And they play such a huge part in the success of this post. And what in doing so, what we're working with a network scientist and a couple of academics to do is really, what in particular, based on, gender, based on interests, based on particular goals, can we do on our platform to really promote, that empowerment in a new city and sense of self and, acclimation. And so we're really hoping that through our communities, we can bring people together based on, those diversity, the parts that make them diverse and the parts that make them, really, really special. And likewise, what we're also really excited about is the data we're going to collect. And hopefully this data, that people are now typing on Google or TripAdvisor for, will be shown on Pivt. And that's high level information that we can give back to employers to help drive those business decisions and really help, with diversity in the workplace.
As companies are spending less money, at least in the short-term future, on things like business travel, how will that impact your ability to ensure that people that are working remotely, no matter if that's, at a family member's house or your own home, or no matter if you're in the city or in a suburb or wherever you're located, but you still feel a part of something much larger? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so for sure. So there is, a decrease in spending, especially in travel. What we're really focusing on is in relocation, things are actually, moving in a good direction. We've seen, actually an uptick in requests that have been signed in the relocation management space. But also, as you mentioned before, what needs to be considered is the people that have already relocated. So Pivt, we ran a study in the beginning of the pandemic, and we interviewed 200 expats and found that over 50% of them didn't know anything about the healthcare system in their new country before COVID. And less than 40% of them had a support network to rely on. And those are just, staggering statistics in terms of, how can employers help support those people that are already there and really struggling. And I think that's going to be, a growing cause. The other thing we're keeping a close eye on is 1 in 5 people in the US have relocated on their own or know someone that has done so as a result of COVID-19. And so how is that going to change employee benefits? Because snacks in the office and company happy hours are no longer relevant or going to lead to retention. And so what we're trying to see is we're reaching out to people, head of benefits and employee management, and seeing if Pivt could potentially provide a solution for people that are relocating on their own, because they still feel that social isolation. They still have all of those challenges, even if it's not through a corporate move. And even more so because their primary source of, meeting people in the office is not available for them.
That's a tremendously high percentage already, and we're only 6 months into this. That's incredible. I think it really illustrates, I think, how people are re-envisioning their own personal and professional priorities as well. And, as people move from urban to more suburban, and suburban to back to more urban, and et cetera, that creates a whole lot of opportunity for companies to really think through so many different things differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It really, really does.
I want to talk a bit about mentoring and advocacy, because you do a lot of work mentoring other entrepreneurs and really serving as advocates for them too. Share with us a bit about how that's changed over time, in the sense of where do you really see the true needs are right now, and maybe that may have been different in the past.
And by that you mean through COVID or just generally?
Just generally.
Yeah, I think one of the positive things when I started mentoring about 3 years ago, when I felt that I was very fortunate that I was able to make a lot of mistakes as a founder and see a lot of mistakes made as a venture capitalist, and had wanted others to kind of learn from those and to be able to give back. And one of the good things is I don't think we are anywhere close to the fight being over. But I do think that women are a little bit more supported than when I started 3 years ago. And I think that there's more organizations that are helping, women move their careers forward, are really kind of giving them funding to grow. And again, it's still extremely, extremely low. And it has such a ways to go, but I do think, that it's on the right path. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's really exciting what universities are doing. So at my own college, Franklin and Marshall College, we're starting an entrepreneurship and innovation department, at a small liberal arts school. And I think a lot of these colleges and universities are starting to foster, entrepreneurship and really take advantage of a great time where you are surrounded by professors that can be a great resource, and alumni, and the amount of free time that a lot of people have in college, and starting them from a really young age to help them through that process of kind of exploring what they're curious about, and making mistakes early on. So I think that's also really exciting.
I love what you just said around making mistakes. And I think that, look, like it's hard for women to feel comfortable with making mistakes, because there are so many different ways in which women feel judged by themselves, judged by others, right? And so it's complicated, right? And so there's a moment in time now, I think, where we can feel more comfortable with taking some risks and making some mistakes, because the world's kind of one big messy place right now. But talk to us a bit about some of the mistakes that you referenced just now, early on, that you made, that you feel that we could all learn from, no matter if we're entrepreneurs, funders, corporate executives, owners, et cetera, et cetera.
How much time do you have? I make mistakes every day, and there's so many, that I could share. One of the big ones is that I learned was, so I assumed with Pivt that since I was a relocated employee, that if I felt that a feature would be useful for me, it would be useful, to the greater relocated employee audience. And that's just not the case. And so we spent, money and time building something that wasn't validated. And so, one of the big things that I always recommend is stay as close to your customers as you can. I say, stay shoulder to shoulder if you can. Always have a group of customers that you can depend on to ask them, how is this going to be useful for you? If this doesn't exist, how are you going to kind of combat this and do things because it doesn't exist? And really make sure that every single feature is validated before you spend any money to build it out. And I think that's, really the essence of an MVP, right? At every stage, and it's super important. The other thing is, your team, as we've mentioned a couple of times, is just so important. And so what I always advise, early stage founders is, the first members of your team should really be a reflection of your product. They are an extension of you, and they're an extension of what you're trying to achieve. And so when hiring them, kind of think of them as such. Their actions are going to reflect your company. And those people are really a reflection of your team and your company. And, it's easier said than done, because obviously it's really difficult to, attract talent at an early stage where you can't offer the benefits that Amazon does and Facebook does, and you're really selling those people on a mission. But it is so important that, their character and their drive really represents what you're trying to push.
We hear the phrase, hire slow, fire fast a lot in the startup world. And that really speaks to being very thoughtful around how you make important decisions, but then cutting your losses when you know that it's not working. And I think as women, sometimes, totally overgeneralizing now, but I think sometimes as women, we like to give people the benefit of the doubt. We like to have hope that things can change, that people change, and that we can, at some point reach common consensus on being on the same page at the same time, or et cetera, et cetera. But also sometimes then, because of that, ignoring our intuition or ignoring that gut feeling that often keeps us up at night, when deep down we know that the decision is not the right decision, right? And we need to really move on and not worry so much about hurting other people's feelings, and not worrying about what people are going to say, and all those excuses that we make in our minds. Have you found that to be true in the sense of how you've built your company as well? And what advice do you have for women who may be struggling with issues similar to that right now?
Absolutely, completely guilty of that. And I think it's really like a muscle. You got to build it, and it takes time and it takes practice. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And that's really all I can say is work on it, and to trust your gut. Because as I said, there's nothing more important than protecting that image of your company. And the people that are in it. And so, sometimes it's really challenging to pull the plug, especially when it hasn't been, too long of a time that they've been on your team, but it's, so important.
You work with companies who are employing people across virtually every generation group right now, from Gen Zs to baby boomers, and everything in between. Let's go through quickly each generation and talk to us about what advice, knowing what you know about the work that you do, what advice do you have for each generation, particularly right now as we're all struggling and using 2020 as a reframing point for our own careers. Let's start with baby boomers.
Well, what's really interesting about baby boomers is they're so digitally inclined and so intuitive, and they're really, they're more in depth to make a decision faster, and to want things more instantaneously. And so, what I encourage them to do is to understand that a lot of the times, executives, especially in legacy organization or fields like relocation, that are 30 years behind in terms of technology, and people have, been working in that industry their entire life, is to be a little bit more patient and to really do your best to understand that a lot of the times the people that are, sitting in the front office really are going by different norms, and really trying to understand that, and really trying to kind of put that into your everyday life. So I think for me, working at Bloomberg was so critical for that. I learned how to, type a proper email. I learned, the number of days I should wait until following up, how to speak to people on the phone from different generations. I think it's, that's so important because, Snapchat and Instagram and texting is not what, all the different generations are used to.
So we often refer to Gen Z as the forgotten generation sandwiched between baby boomers and millennials. But yet we know that Gen Z is next in line after the baby boomers start to retire. And so, wondering from your perspective, as we think about, everything from succession planning to, promotion and advancement, continued promotion and advancement for Gen Z, what are you seeing for that generation right now?
I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see, really what comes out of that, because as we're seeing, and we'll jump to that in a little bit, I bet, but millennials are really, before COVID, were spending more on experiences, really weren't saving as much as, the past. And I think what Gen Z should probably learn from us is that you probably should save a little bit, with times like, COVID, it's really, really essential to actually, save up, put money in the bank, and not just, worry about today or tomorrow. And I hope that they learn that, through COVID, when they get to the workforce.
So it's interesting what you're saying around experiences, because I think that, so much of what we experience now is largely what happens under our own roof, right? And so we're not traveling as much. We're not spending money on, entertainment and clothes and things that we used to take pleasure in. So we're really kind of peeling it back and going back to basics, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I would imagine also that impacts everything from like how companies think about culture building, things like dress codes, for example, or the way in which, even a Zoom call can be become more of a level playing field, particularly when you're hosting people, right? And everyone's kind of has equal access. Like there's that pyramid now is not necessarily so much like this, but it's like a Brady Bunch of squares, rectangles, right? And so how are companies thinking about, ensuring that, and I guess this is exactly what Pivt is designed and inspired to do, is to create more experiences for people to feel part of that collective in a moment in time where, compensation may no longer be necessarily about a monetary dollar amount, but more about the totality of what the experience offers.
Exactly. So, what we were finding before COVID is especially millennials, as I said, they wanted to take experiences abroad. I think 70% of them wanted to work abroad at some point in their career. I think, and that was something that corporations were starting to offer. And I still think that's the case. But as I said, earlier, with that, there's going to have to be a new wave of employee benefits, because casual dress code in the office and company happy hours and free snacks, is no longer going to be such a big perk to keep people on board. I think there's going to, have to be a whole new wave. And that starts with, well-being. I think employees really want to be taken care of. I think they want to know that they're, of importance and being looked after. And I also think that it's going to have a little bit more of a holistic standpoint, including their family. What are you doing for their family? In those things. And I think that's really what's going to come out of this. And then also flexibility, right? I think a lot of people have said that they're liking working from home, and they're going to want some sort of flexibility in that. And again, that we've already seen that's led to people moving more on their own. Maybe they can get more room in the suburbs, and if they only have to commute 3 days a week, that's something that will give them more joy. And so being flexible with that and kind of working with those employees to really see, how they can change with and provide, that sort of support in that environment.
Lynn, you're providing value for your ecosystem, for your customer. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I can say that again. I just make this stuff up as I go along sometimes.
They're good. They're really good.
Yeah. Lynn, I have an interesting question for you that goes back to something you were saying earlier around the big data component of your technology platform, and wanted to talk with you through the delicate balance that entrepreneurs often walk between ensuring that you're providing value for your investors, which often means big data, versus ensuring that you're protecting the rights and the privacy of your end users, of your members, of your clients. To ensure that you're delivering to them, but also same time delivering to investors without kind of murking up that water in the sense of what data should really be protected versus what is available to a larger audience.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's a really fine line. And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is really knowing, who your investors are before, signing anything on the dotted line. You want to make sure that your missions are aligned, that your expectations are completely aligned, because, they, a lot of the times, as you mentioned, will want to push the monetary side of things. And that's not always the best thing for your company or your clients or your mission. And a lot of the times it's not. And so how do you really balance that? That should all be things that are discussed, before you sign the contract with the investors, really getting on the same page about that. But, really how we've been looking at it is how can we provide, value to our users, and also the HR departments and the corporations in terms of giving them high level data. So it's not individual user data, but high level data that they can then use to drive business decisions. And a lot of the times, by doing that and not giving specific user data, that's something that can be really impactful without stepping on anyone's toes.
Lynn, so Pivt obviously is the name of your company, but it's also obviously something that many of us are thinking about right now. Those of us who have been furloughed or laid off are really thinking about what is next, like who do we want to be when we grow up? And for many of us, that means leaving the past behind and creating and launching something new. And the delicate balance, I think, that for women often comes down to the fact of, are you growing and scaling for the sake of growth and scale so you can grow and achieve and attract VC opportunities? Or are you creating more of a business that may be more self-contained in the sense of going about it the old-fashioned way, in the sense of generating revenue per se? So from your perspective and from your experience, what do you recommend as one's thinking through what's the best configuration for a business you may want to start?
Yeah. So, just really acknowledging that, although getting venture money has in the media, gotten this reputation for being really glorified and something to strive towards, it's not for every business. And so knowing that there are different options out there, that you don't need to grow at 10x for you to be a successful business is really, really important. And so I hope people recognize that there is a lot of responsibility and that comes with getting venture money, and it will crush certain businesses. And so it certainly isn't for everyone. And to really, before you opt into one way or another, to really explore your options and really see, what fits in with your lifestyle, what fits in with your mission, and what's really going to, help your clients. And that's ultimately, the things that I would take into consideration when looking for next steps. The other thing I'll mention is actually Pivt. The name of Pivt was actually started. The inspiration was a basketball pivot, in the sense that you're keeping one foot on the ground towards your roots, and with the other foot going in a different direction. And I think that it's always important to kind of keep that mentality, that, to use the experiences and the contacts that you've had made in the past and can build upon. Because even though you're starting new, it's never actually from scratch, right? And, you've formed a network, you've made mistakes that you can, learn from and grow from.
That was so beautifully articulated. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think that for many women who have reinvented their careers once, twice, 10 times, we often forget about the history and the heritage that made us who we were before we are now who we are today. Right. And there's incredible value, because that's honestly, like, that's your secret sauce. Like, who you were in the past, like, blends to the credibility that you have. Even if you think that what you're doing today is very dissimilar to what you were doing in the past, it's always a part of your narrative, always a part of the way in which you weave your story. And honestly, the way in which people are going to remember you today too, because there's so much oversaturation in almost every vertical right now.
Mm-hmm. And thinking about, okay, what from your experiences makes you unique. So maybe that it doesn't make a ton of sense from, an outsider, that you're jumping from sports to an HR company or whatever it may be. But what are the skills, or what are the things that you learned from your first experience that you're thinking, never again? And I really learned this the hard way. And so in doing this, I'm never going to do that again. And this is how I'm going to, uniquely bring value to these type of customers.
Lynn, here's a question for you. What would you never want to do again?
So one of the things that I did learn from working in, an 8 to 6 office job is I never really wanted to sit at a desk from 8 to 6. And that was really important for me to learn, and to kind of, explore new career opportunities from there, is just knowing that that's just not the way that I operate the best. I'm not as productive when I'm sitting at a desk, for 12 hours straight.
It's interesting. I think because of COVID, I think many of us are having that realization that, sitting at a desk from 8 to 6 or 8 to 8 or whatever that time period is just not what it's cracked up to be anymore, particularly because it's about health and safety in the workplace too.
Yeah, which is really tough, because for employees, that's one thing, but for the employers, it's specifically tough to create a culture where not everyone is shoulder to shoulder and right next to each other and in the same office. So that's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on, as well as how are employers going to really work with employees who are starting to realize this and create that culture that they pride themselves on.
So true. Such a good point. I think that there's so much creation happening right now. And when we look at past moments and times that could be somewhat similar to this, so we look at, even though on a very different scale, what happened in 2007, 2008. And from those ashes, we saw unicorns like WeWork and Uber and all the sharing, Airbnb. We were talking about that before the show, Rent the Runway, like all these sharing economy unicorns that now, precisely because of COVID, it's going to be interesting to see how they come out on the other side, given the fact that we were all sharing all this stuff together, and we obviously can't do that for a while. But what do you predict in this time period of COVID, given everything that we're learning about it? What are some of the predictions that you have in the sense of where will the greatest amount of innovation come from?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that employee well-being part, so whether that's mental health, whether that's providing, a more holistic solution, I think and social isolation, I think that's top of mind for everyone across the board. And so I think that's something that's going to have a greater emphasis past, and in the new normal. I also think, what's also going to be interesting is home ownership, and solutions around that, because I think people are now going to be looking for home offices and maybe perhaps gyms, or a place where they can do their workouts, whether that's a yard or an extra room, because people don't want to be around people all the time during COVID. And so I think that creates a whole new wave for, how can we digitally connect, whether that be through exercise classes online, which are booming right now, to how are you going to do kind of happy hours virtually. And as I said, I think, the companies that are able to create that digital culture that is so hard to create online are really going to have something, tremendous. And I think companies like Slack, the collaboration tools are going to be more and more important, because I don't think people are going to necessarily go back to the office in the way they once did.
Right. And I think that this, just from the sense of efficiency and productivity, given the fact that we're all working different schedules now too, or should have the capability of working different schedules based upon our other life demands, and who else is living in the household with us too, is going to become much more critical.
Yeah,
absolutely. So we're ready for the lightning round now. So these are two questions I love to ask to everyone, and can't wait to hear your responses. So first question is, if you could describe 2020 in 3 or less words, what would it be?
Awful. Challenge. Yeah, just terrible.
Another guest that we were speaking with earlier today said, "Oh my God, I know that's perfect. 3 words, perfect."
That is perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Next question is, what advice? So many people ask, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? I like to ask, what advice today would you give to your 85-year-old self?
Ooh. So I guess, would it be like the things that I wish I had accomplished by 85, or like what would my 85-year-old self tell me now? Or vice versa?
However you want to interpret it.
I hope, and I don't know if this is the right direction, but I hope when I'm 85 that I can say that, I've lived a life with as few regrets as possible. And I've really made something or done something for the world that, didn't exist in the past, and have in some ways through my unique experience have contributed to the world to make it a better place. And that's all you can really ask for.
Thanks, Lynn. So beautifully said. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today. Oh, how can our viewers stay in contact with you?
Yes, so please shoot me an email at lynn@pivtapp.com. So it's LYNN @pivt, PIVTAPP.com. Or feel free to find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Thank
you so much.
Congratulations on what you're building and growing and scaling. And I can't wait to check in with you in a few months to see good luck with your fundraising too.
Thank you so much. So appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks everyone for staying with us today. I'm Jan Mercer-Dahms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please make sure to check out our YouTube channel, Join Mayshad, and our site, joinmayshad.com, to learn about how you too can become a member of this incredible journey that we're all on together. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.